Hey guys, I'm Eric from Brain and Body Health. Today is round 2 with Dr. Scott Wostenberg. He's one of my good mates from Optimal Life Chiropractic in Queensland. Scotty's one of these super smart guys that I don't know how he finds the hours in the day to study as much as he does. But I always learn a lot when I listen to Scotty. Today we talked a lot about mold exposure and what it does to your brain if inflammation creeps into your brain. We talk about the mechanism behind that. We also talk about some of the things that you can do to fix that if that's an issue. So guys, if you've got any questions or thoughts, feel free to email me in at eric@brainandbodyhealth.com.au. But otherwise, enjoy.
All right. So should we declare this meeting in session?
That exactly.
Beautiful.
We can do that. Right.
Mate, there's something happened over the weekend that sort of relates to you, but I feel like you would empathise. So someone that you've seen came in to see me, and just pretty classic lumbo-pelvic instability, back pain, blah blah blah. But she'd mentioned that she'd seen you for some anemia issues and that you'd penned this lovely letter for her to take to her GP to get some further tests done to say, hey, we need this investigated. We know what it is. We just want to get the levels checked. And then the classic just bullshit move on the GP's part is that they've apparently read your letter, seen chiropractor, and gone, there's nothing wrong with your anemia levels. That's bullshit. I'm not referring you off for those tests. Or if I do, it's not going to be covered from a Medicare point of view. So you can pay for it on your own. But I flatly refuse to do anything about it. And that just frustrated the shit out of me because I know it's a big hassle whenever I need to include GPs in the mix in terms of, hey, this pain's not going away, I need an ultrasound on this area, and then they see that it's come from a chiropractor and gone, oh yeah, chiropractors are all pedophiles. Let's treat them like the scum they are, even though I'm following all of the medical guidelines and doing everything by the right, and then you just get shut. I mean it doesn't happen to me terribly often. But I'd imagine with your sort of biochem background, you've got to be getting that significantly more often than I do.
Unfortunately, I absolutely am. That's truly disappointing. Hopefully, they're not actually considering us pedophiles at that moment in time. But, what they're also doing by not working with us is they're actually breaking the law as it stands with APRA. Fundamentally, what they're meant to do is work with us for the patient's best good, and they should be taking the letter as it's written, and rather than refusing to do something because of who sent it, they should look at it, assess the patient to make a consideration in the patient's best good. So fundamentally, that's a case that could be referred to the board for assessment of that situation.
Well, it's just I don't understand it because they're like ethically, it's just terrible. Like forget APRA laws, ethically.
Oh, it's absolutely appalling.
Horrible because you're holding a patient's health hostage for your own bloody ego. Like, Jesus, mate, stow it. And what's best for the patient? If a GP came in and said, oh, you know what, you don't need to adjust the neck, you need to adjust the thoracics, like, okay, fair enough. I'm going to look into that, assess it, and see, based on my judgment. But you take on board you don't just immediately dismiss someone's idea without considering it. That's just, anyway.
Yes.
That was my frustrating little weekend.
Oh,
I felt bad on your behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I go through it all the time. I mention to patients that fundamentally, if the doctor can't agree to see a rationale for it, that they're going to have to pay it because we'll need the information anyway. So hopefully we'll get the data because it's in their best interest.
I just said, look, find a different GP. And then so today we want to talk about on to happier things. Today we want to talk about mold and brain inflammation.
Yes.
Mate, so run me through it. How dangerous is this stuff?
Well, mold is phenomenally dangerous. It's pervasive everywhere. And so one of the things people kind of don't really understand is that your mitochondria are considered to be a type of ancient bacteria that sort of evolved and became symbiotic. So they actually kind of put themselves into our cells and are still a form of bacteria that actually live inside us. Now, the mitochondria we, of course, inherit from our mothers only. And so if your mother's energy is good, then you'll probably have good energy. If there's a problem, well, that's not so good for you. But mold and bacteria have spent lifetimes fighting one another and competing for resources, which is no great surprise. And what we know, of course, is that mold has developed a whole bunch of interesting chemicals, things called aflatoxins, amongst other names, that basically block the function of the protein complexes in these bacteria, or the mitochondria specifically, and stop them actually producing energy. So, of course, from a human perspective, the aflatoxins from the mold actually block the energy production of our cells, and this causes us to have fatigue. Now, if you think about it from the point of view of, say, a neuron is massively energy intensive. So to actually keep firing requires lots and lots of mitochondria and lots of metabolic resources to go into actually driving that neuronal function. So if you've got these toxins, aflatoxins, being released by fungi or molds in your body and from your environment, what's going to occur is that your energy output's going to decline. So anything that requires massive levels of energy is going to start to get into a distress state. It's going to produce more lactic acid because it's going to do the job anaerobically. Now, lactic acid and neurons don't go together at all. You just do not pour acid into a neuron because it goes bang. And so you start to get diascosis and these transneuronal degenerative cycles going on, because as you keep stressing it, it keeps trying to fire to keep itself working, and that kind of fundamentally changes the structural shape and causes swelling and causes inflammation. So the neurons basically start to die off over a period of time, depending on the degree of mold exposure. So from the opposite point of view, what we also know is that bacteria have developed chemicals that actually drive the fungi into distress at the same time. And this is where penicillin was developed from. So the interplay between the molds and the bacteria are also going to go on inside your body, and fundamentally you're going to be the battleground, which will make you fairly sick. Ultimately, what we're going to get from the other side of it is, as those fungi and molds start to release spores, we get infiltration into a bunch of different areas. Now, the most prevalent fungi that most people might have heard of is something called Candida albicans. And this particular mold is considered almost a normal commensal. It's so prevalent that we generally find some in everyone's gut. And it loves feeding on glucose and sugars. So, of course, diets that are very high in processed carbohydrates tend to feed these wonderful symbiotes, if you can call it that, very effectively. And this, of course, makes them a much stronger colony in you than they should be. Now, one of the things that does is, of course, it can create the release of a whole bunch of further chemicals that drive inflammation, because they activate your immune system, and the immune system releases cytokines, and the cytokines generate more response. That response in itself is inflammation, and this can cause leaking, so that food chunks that are not fully digested can leak into your gut. And what we can also get when we start trying to kill the candida is that they can go into a dormant hyphal phase. So you start stressing them by starving them out, or taking antibiotic type preparations, antifungals, so to speak, that kill them. And the candida itself is actually clever enough that it'll go into a dormant or almost dead state, and they'll stay that way for up to 3 to 6 months. So, you do all the right things, you starve yourself from all what we consider the goodies in life, no soft drinks, no alcohol, no carbs, you're eating basically, vegetables and protein, and you kind of start to feel better. Your energy starts coming up, brain fog starts to go away, and you go, yeah, I've done it. And kind of 3 months kind of goes by, and people go, yep, I've done it. I feel good. I'm not doing this anymore because this sucks. And they start putting the foods back in because, we all like bread or, pasta or chips, all the normal things, nothing horrendous. And the candida comes back to life again. And it starts its cycle all over again. Now, the really fun thing about candida is its structure, when it turns hyphal, is that it can actually escape the attack from the antifungals, etc. And it will actually burrow into your tissue and go between the gap junctions and tight junctions into other parts of the body away from where it was living.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Because when you hear about people with the candida overgrowth, how does it get from gut through to the body? So it's through leaky gut?
Well, it's not just through leaky gut. It actually forms a structural shape that's kind of diamond pyramid shaped, and it has a very similar density almost. So like crystal, it will actually puncture through the cell walls to go through between them into the bloodstream and can circulate that way. So you don't actually have to create inflammation to cause a leaking gut. It creates it itself when it's in this state. So it's really dangerous.
So what then... So that's the process of creating sort of the mold overexposure systemically in your body. Mm-hmm. How then is that the inflammation created from the leaky gut point of view then makes the blood-brain barrier permeable and then it gets into your
Absolutely. So the more inflammation that we have, the more cytokine release, the more stress we're under with the more cortisol and adrenaline being released, the larger the gaps start stretching between the cells and the tight junctions in the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier kind of has this emotional context that it's quite solid. We imagine a barrier being like a brick wall, but this is the interplay on the outside of the blood vessels, and so the outside of blood vessels isn't really all that tight as far as the cellular junctions is concerned. These things leak really effectively. A little bit of inflammation causes a blood vessel to leak anywhere.
Has there been any research to show what level of inflammatory cytokines you need circulating throughout your body to cause changes in blood-brain barrier?
There probably is some absolute detail. I can't remember what the actual level is off the top of my head, but further to that, there are epigenetic traits that will cause greater degrees of inflammation to be actually created. So you could have 70% more inflammation systemically just because of your epitope than Joe Bloggs down the road. So it wouldn't take as much stimulus to create as big a response in you. It might take 70% more stimulus to create the same effect in Joe Bloggs.
And I suppose a few questions. So let's say candida gets into your brain. Mm-hmm. What can be done about it? Do we focus more on getting the mold out of the brain, or do we focus more on trying to close up the blood-brain barrier or leaky gut? Like what level do we attack?
Well, fundamentally in those situations, you're going to start by focusing on closing the gut first and foremost. So we have to alter the input of food supply for them, and this is where the benefits of things like the ketogenic diet start coming in, because if we start putting the person onto a higher fat ketone generating diet, therefore the brain can operate on the ketone bodies, the glucose that would normally be supplying isn't there because Candida lives on glucose. It doesn't want to live on ketones. It doesn't really have the metabolism to actually generate energy out of it. Their life cycle is a bit simpler than that. So if we put you on a ketotic diet for 6 months, we can basically starve them effectively enough that they start to die. So you're going to work on decreasing inflammation in the gut lining. So we have to take away all the irritants that'll actually do that. We have to starve them, so we get rid of all the foods and allergen creating things to create an environment that nothing's getting into you. And further to that, we then kind of look at how do we get your vagal tone to actually start calming this down, because if we haven't altered how the brain's responding to the whole thing, the largest generator of leaky gut and inflammation is the brain cycle of the mesencephalon. Yeah, you basically keep winding yourself up. That keeps damaging the gut lining and you keep leaking.
Actually, that's a really cool segue into a question. So off last week's podcast when we were talking about cryotherapy, I wanted to know, so with cryotherapy, is there an upregulation of gene expression for anti-inflammatories, or is it more the shock of the cold is causing a more like you're upregulating vagal tone? So is it like you're affecting genetic expression, or are you affecting vagal activation?
You absolutely are affecting genetic expression. So that's the sirtuin genes. So the sirtuin genes, from a survival point of view, are
How do I spell that for me? Because I'm gonna do some Google.
Okay, SIRTUINS. And so SIRT2 or SIR2 is the one that seems to have the biggest effect on these things, but there's a whole population of genes in that family that seem to have this propensity for your survival, down-regulating inflammation, decreasing stress, decreasing swelling, but at the same time you do absolutely get an alteration of vagal tone. You're going to get an alteration of blood supply just purely because of the cold. You're going to get generation around the organs because of it. It changes the supply around your skin. So you're going to get both effects, but really why we're doing it is much more for the genetic expression rather than the actual physical put ice on something. Like the current concepts behind ice are suggesting that that's actually bad for us, and sticking ice on your skin for an injury is actually slowing down the healing rate.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah, the days of ice are long gone, except unless you want to blast the whole body with it. And then, so I'd imagine with that sort of upregulation of genetic expression of sirtuin genes, that'd be where sort of cryotherapy visit number 1 isn't going to be as effective for you as visit number 10?
Potentially. That depends also to some degree on the length of time between each visit. So if you have one visit a month, you're going to get a whole bunch of upregulation again. And again, as I say, some people's systems are extremely inflammatory in their genetic makeup, and other people's won't be. And some people's lifestyles, obviously, if you drink, smoke, eat garbage, sleep poorly, you're going to get a lot more inflammation than someone who's trying very hard to actually follow current best practices. Therefore, you're just not going to do as well, and you won't get as big a bang for buck from each one. But loading them together, like doing kind of 2 or 3 quite close together and then having a couple of days gap and then doing another one, is going to give you a much better up regulation.
Yeah, so an initial burst of therapy and then spacing.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Flowing on from what we were talking about before, so Candida causes gut permeability issues, and from there it creates brain inflammation by permeating through the blood-brain barrier. If we've got sort of a whole body, either bacterial or candida or mold issues causing inflammation, is the inflammatory cytokine itself small enough to be permeable through the blood-brain barrier? Like, do you need the mold to be in the brain before you're creating brain inflammation?
No, you don't. And so the inflammation seems to be an effect of the immune system in the microglia as soon as it's actually activated. And there's these problems called ramification with microglia and glial cells, that the more you activate the glial cells from different episodes of inflammation, the more likely it is to stay out of the box and be very, very inflammatory ongoing. And so this is part of the problem with a whole lot of head trauma as well. So people who, like boxers perhaps, or football players who get a lot of head knocks, are much more likely to get this ramification of the glial cells. And so it doesn't require a lot of external stimulus to actually activate the whole cycle.
I always pictured that process as having a whole bunch of Bruce Banners running around your brain, and you keep poking him, and then they turn into the Hulk and start breaking shit. And then it takes a while to calm down Mr. Hulk, especially when you've got 100 million.
I love that. That's a very, very apt picture.
You can have that one.
Thank you.
Bruce Banner into Hulk in the brain. And I suppose, so if we take a further step back, if we know, is Candida the most common one for the whole body issue?
Well, it's certainly the one that's most common. Talked about anyway.
And is it primarily from a gut bacterial issue, not attacking Candida or keeping that under wraps properly?
Arguably, I'd say it's much more to do with people's lifestyle choices. I had a patient comment to me on Saturday morning, their disbelief whereby, the child is fed perfectly for the first several years of their life. We're giving them, fruit and vegetables, and they've gone from breast milk, and suddenly they get to a point where you're old enough now. Here's a soft drink. Here's a bunch of sugar. And this is actually, quite an apt situation of exactly what goes on. We get to a certain point where we start giving them more ice creams and soft drinks and chippies, etc. And then there become social pressures around, they've got the tiny titties in their lunchbox, where are mine? But those highly processed foods are, of course, going to be upregulating the quorum of both not so good bacteria as well as Candida. So it's not really that your bacteria aren't fighting them. It's literally that you're feeding all the wrong things in there. And basically, there's no good reason to assume that Candida in itself is actually bad. But if you feed it to a point where it's kind of running the show, no good things are going to come from it. And then you add all those other stresses, it gets to go anywhere it wants. Because let's face it, they all want to live. It's not like they're really going, Eric, I want to kill you. They really don't. They want you to keep going as long as possible, because once you're dead, their gravy train's gone. So really all they're doing is trying to keep their own selves alive. It just happens that that's not really compatible with life long term. So I
had a really, really fun run-in with my parents, where they were looking after my little boy Sterling for the day. And I think I dropped him off early, went to the gym, and then I was picking him up. This is like 10 o'clock in the morning, I was picking him up. And I get home and I get back to my parents' place, and he just starts doing a nana, having a, tantrum. I mean, he's 2.5 at this stage, so, fair enough. You're allowed to have a tantrum.
Yeah.
Started to really lose it, and my mum goes, I'll just get him an ice cream. He always calms down when we give him an ice cream when he's having a tantrum.
Oh
no! I just looked at her and I'm like, how am I not more of a mess if that's your parenting technique? It was just like, I couldn't tell you on how many levels that is so bad. One, you're like reinforcing the behavioral pattern of you act up, you get ice cream.
Yeah.
Two, you're inflaming him with the ice cream, which is probably perpetuating the inflammatory emotional drama. It's just like, oh, damn it. So I had to sit mum down and say, no.
Right, that's awesome. Not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah.
And I suppose so. I think we've already talked about it, but I had a question that I wanted to ask you about the difference between concussion-based mechanisms for microglial priming and the inflammatory consequences from that, compared to the microglial. Like microglial priming is the same for concussion versus inflammation from food and mold.
To the largest degree, the concussion and TBI and whiplash, etc., seem to do it much more suddenly because there's a bigger degree of impact at that moment. So they come out very, very suddenly. But what we get over a longer period of time and with exacerbation because of it being a chronic low-grade infection with mold or bacteria, etc., is that the body remembers, and the more you kind of get your stress to suppress you and the bacteria and mold kind of get away on you, we get more activation of the glia. And every time it kind of starts to get bad, your immune system goes, right, well, next time I see this, I'm going to deal with it. And so I'm going to be on my toes. And after enough of those activations, it just is, I need to be here all the time because this is not going away. And so that inflammation is just constantly trolling because it's there to deal with the impacts of our environment. And, go back 100,000 years, we didn't have the food supplies. So if there was bacteria in there or mold, it must have come from an open wound, most likely. And so it needed to be there defending you because otherwise you were dead. So
I was listening to this interesting podcast. It's Joe Rogan and one of his regular Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
And I checked out her website. And she seems like a very similar approach to what you've got. It starts out with the genetic sampling of checking your genome and then going from there. But she was talking about there's a particular gene. What was it? Something. I can't remember, but it was basically about how likely you are to get microglial priming from a concussion or a head knock. And there was two genes that they were looking at. If you've got one copy of this gene or allele or whatever the terminology is, you were 5 times more likely to develop concussion from a head knock. If you had the double whammy, both alleles, then you were like 20 times more likely to suffer sort of the classic concussion symptoms from a head knock. So I'd imagine if there were the sort of genetic expression for making you more likely to get brain inflammation from a head knock, it would also make you more likely to get concussion-based symptoms from systemic inflammation.
That makes perfect sense to me. Absolutely.
So you could be concussing yourself with that bottle of whatever or that spoon of ice cream.
Absolutely.
If you've got the which makes a lot of sense because you get some people and they've had the barest of tiny little head knocks and then they're just wiped for months and months and months and months and months, and then you get idiot down the road who just completely knocks himself out and you can't find neurologically anything wrong with him afterwards, no matter how hard you look.
That makes absolute sense. I mean, as we spoke about last week when we were kind of talking about, say, ice cream and the proteins in it, those mu receptor opioids can cause you to be, activating a whole bunch of negative effects in the system anyway, because it's going to cause a brain fog and sedation of your brainstem in the first place. The sugar is going to drive inflammation. It's just like kind of pouring petrol on any inflammation that's there. And the actual act of making energy in your mitochondria releases oxidative stress molecules in the first place. So everything creates oxidative stress at that moment. There's nothing really good to come of it. It just happens to taste yummy, according to most people.
It should be one of those things where, okay, you really need to get genetic sequencing done on everyone, and then that'll say, okay, you want ice cream? These are the consequences. Or, you know what, you are safe for ice cream. We should have the ice cream.
I'm just, unfortunately, kind of a bit draconian where I'm like, we should probably get rid of milk in the majority of people. It just doesn't work for people, and we're all marketed to such an extent that, ice cream is good because we say it's yummy, not this is actually any good for anyone. And because it's been in our environment kind of longer than the average person's memory has been around post-war, we kind of just accept that it must be okay because we have it. And, that's not really viable evidence.
Well, yeah, what was it? 15% of the population with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bad. The other thing, did you read that paper that came out? I think it was a couple of years ago now. It showed a link that depression was an allergic reaction to inflammation in the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And again,
that sounds like a bloody horrible situation if you're allergic to inflammation, creating more of an allergic reaction.
I'm not convinced it's an allergic reaction. I just think that the inflammation in of itself is driving problems with the neuron. Like it just shows that when you start damaging the phospholipids, etc., in the myelin, you're going to get a significant slowing of transmission. Now, as you slow transmission, again, what we get is this thing called transneuronal degeneration, and we get problems with gene expression and problems with protein, and we don't keep that cell working particularly well. Now, that causes swelling, and it causes a change in the actual structural morphology where the nucleus, instead of it being centric, becomes off to the side, and that creates further swelling, and those cells at some point die. Now, what then occurs is that network, because roughly every cell has about 10,000 connections in the nervous system, roughly. I'm not the one to be able to tell you the exact numbers on that because the numbers are too huge. I think it's something like there's 4 quadrillion connections in the brain, which,
Couple.
Yeah. So as soon as you start kind of distressing those cells and creating the die-off from any form of inflammation, because these cells are so very sensitive, we get this kind of wave-like depression of neuronal function. Now, you do that in someone's frontal lobe or in their brainstem or, say, in their hypothalamus, etc., hippocampus, you're going to get negative consequences to how their mood and their behavior is. So if there's an allergy to the inflammation, that's possible, but there's enough just from lifestyle stress factors and inflammation from your environment to cause it. Like, I've watched people who eat their allergenic food get an absolute change in their effect. Their personality declines. They become, emotionally despondent. They become stressed. I had a lady who we took off her foods that were a problem for 12 weeks, and her mood improved and she got healthier. And so we gave it back to her, and she fundamentally burst into tears. And then asked me if I thought that it was the bread that was causing the problem. You find a polite way to say, well, look, we've just done this, and this is how you are. So I think there's enough inflammation without us actually considering an allergy to the inflammation. Because, again...
Yeah, don't need the... I read an interesting... actually, one sec on that, mate. Hey, Lenny, can you come grab my phone? My phone's going nuts. Someone's trying to call me. Mate, can you give that to Eleni? I read a paper recently, and it was showing that so they basically did a long-term study over good 20, 30 years, and they checked. I can't remember what sort of levels, but it was in the people in their 40s and 50s. They checked inflammatory levels at that stage of their life. And then they monitored it every couple of years, and the people who had sort of a moderate amount of inflammation from 40s, as they aged, got into later life, there was a significant amount of brain atrophy in the chronic inflamed group compared to the non-chronically inflamed group. And it was something like 500 millimeters cubed loss of area in the occipital lobe, like 300 millimeters cubed in the hippocampus. Like, it was just huge chunks of the brain taken out from that chronic inflammation style stuff, which scared the crap out of me when you start talking about, triple digits loss of brain volume.
Oh my goodness, that's terrible.
It was big numbers, like in good ice cream.
I have not seen that one, but
I'll send it
that'd
over
be
to you.
awesome.
It was a bit of a scary read because I saw that and went, holy shit, I really have to get that under control.
Absolutely.
Because I kind of like my brain and I don't want it to get any holes in it.
That was the same thing for me when kind of, 5 odd years ago, I went through sitting in a neurology seminar, and we got up and we did a Fukuda marching test. And, I was standing there thinking I was doing it on the spot. I was the shit, had my stuff together. And, after 50 steps, I open my eyes and I find that I'm about 2 meters straight ahead of where I thought I was.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And at that moment, I kind of had that epiphany moment of, oh, I've got to change everything in my life because I'm fucked.
Yes, there's nothing quite like studying neurology to go, oh, all right, I got some problems.
So, that was the wake up for me that actually said that I had to look at my neurochemistry and my biochemistry and physiology from a much more neurological perspective rather than as a system gut. Like, in functional medicine, we kind of tend to get very bogged down in guts and probiotics and B complexes and run that blood test, etc. And we look at, the genes, etc. But if you haven't looked at it from, that brain interface, a brain-body function, you're not really doing it right, in my opinion. So you need to be considering that everything we're doing is to keep the most beautiful creative part of you working. So to keep your gut quorum working is to be keeping your brain working. It's not do something for the bacteria or the gut by itself. It's why is this dysfunctioning and how is it affecting my brain? What is my brain doing to keep this dysfunction going? And so everything just got a lot more brain specific at that moment in time because you just don't get anywhere otherwise.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of looking at it. Well,
like your name.
Speaking from personal experience, you've certainly helped me fix my brain. And
oh, thank you.
The question I had, so back to mold exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Candida being the most prevalent one, does Candida live outside the body? Like, are there certain things that we should be, if you're mold sensitive?
Oh, yeah.
Is there certain things that you need to be aware of? Because I remember, I don't think it was Tatis, maybe it was
Brandon.
But yeah, when he was talking, he was essentially saying that if you do have a mold issue, you essentially need to burn your house down, burn all of your clothes, move somewhere new, and start from scratch. Otherwise, you're going to transport shit from your linens. You're going to take stuff from your clothes. Like, if you're sensitive to it, it gets everywhere.
That is it.
Whereas I was wondering, because if Candida sort of thrives in your body, does it live in that dormant state external to you?
It absolutely can do, but it's not just Candida. There's huge amounts of other ones. There's Aspergillus, black molds. That's why I said we talk about Candida as the most common one, but there are huge amounts of fungi all over the place, and you've got to worry about them.
Is it one of those things where if you've got a problem with Candida and you're exposed to one of the other ones, like black mold, that's going to exacerbate one? Or does it make it, if you've got an issue with Candida, does it make it easier to get a black mold infestation in your...
That is absolutely the case at that moment in time. So fundamentally, there's megatons of different molds in the environment. So they like living in wet environments. They like humidity. So Queensland's really, really, really good for it. So damp and non-ventilated areas. And they grow and you can't necessarily see it. This is why they're saying, like, burn the house down. But there's plenty of good treatments. You don't have to go quite that far. Like I do things with my patients, like telling them to get a big deep freeze, and we basically take all their bedding linens, etc., and we stick them in the deep freeze for several hours, and then we will hot wash them, and then we get them out into the sun, because ultraviolet light will deal with them. Ozone can kill this stuff off. There are treatments, and there are mold specialists that I would recommend people get their houses inspected by an environmental toxicologist, mold specialists, to actually look at it, see where it's coming from, find the water and airflow problems, and change the airflow. If you dry your environment, then it becomes less of a problem. And, we talk about mold sensitivity. Everyone's mold sensitive to some degree, simply because, if you remember, the mitochondria get attacked by the aflatoxins from whichever mold it is, not just Candida, as I said. So, this is where people will wake up with mucus and coughs and colds, or a headache or foggy headedness, and it doesn't really go away. You might adjust them, you might change their diet a bit, but this is the environmental impacts of mold in their bedroom, or it could be in the bottom of their wardrobe. Carpets are great for harbouring this stuff. You get a bit of water in your carpet, or spill a glass of wine. Wine would be just the most awesome stuff, because it goes through and it lives in the interspace between the backing fibre and the springy rubber stuff. And the wine is full of sugars, and it's full of yeast, and humid environment grows really, really, really well. Carpet is just the most disgusting stuff. Like, everyone kind of goes, "Oh, doesn't it look pretty? Isn't it nice underfoot?" Again, I have Persian...
Whack it under a microscope.
Yeah, I have Persian rugs, so that I can actually get my rugs outside on nice hot days and actually get ultraviolet light into them and bang them out. And you can get people to come in and treat your rugs and make sure they're actually clean. And those are places that the toxicologists take samples from. And it's particularly important because, like, people will go to seminars, and they're in the room and they've woken up feeling good, and they start to get tired later on. A couple of hours in, they're not feeling so good, and then they'll start reaching for those little sugar lollies, and they start feeding.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and they're being spiked because that environment is full of mold. It goes through the air conditioning unit in the carpet, and so you can suffer for days. And again, this is where some people's mitochondria are really robust, and other people's mitochondria aren't necessarily as robust, and they suffer toxicity significantly. Now, in the case that you were speaking about looking at anemia, in a patient that's iron deficiency anemia, frank iron deficiency, remember, every mitochondrial cell in our cells requires 4 molecules of iron to actually make the energy production cycle operate. So if you are exposed to mold toxins and you're iron deficient, you're going to get a triple whammy, because you need the iron for the production of energy, but you also need the iron for the immune system to actually kill off using macrophages in the first place, because it's part of the peroxidation cycle that nukes the mold. So, you're going to be in a whole world of hurt at that moment in time if you're iron deficient, which is one of the reasons why we've got so many people running around with problems out there, because lots of people have low iron and are told that they're absolutely fine and there's nothing wrong with you. Now, again, if you come in with an iron level of 6 or 7 out of, a possible 33, your iron level is going to be really, really hemorrhaging almost everywhere else in the body, because the bloodstream is one of the last places to lose the iron.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
It's a portal. The body's using the portal system to keep all of its nutrients circulating to wherever it might need it. So, like, there's about a 5 million to 1 ratio. For every cell that's got iron in your bloodstream, 5 million other cells in the body are going, where's my share? So if you've got a low iron there, like a 6 or a 7, you're in real hurt. That's brain fog city.
Is that where, because I know in terms of, so when you're doing that HIIT training, so you like minute on, minute off, that sort of 100% exertional activity, then rest, it was more of a upregulation of mitochondrial function from a, like it's very much a nervous system primer from a cardiovascular point of view, as opposed to sort of your chronic cardio pounding the pavement BS. Is that where, for people with that sort of mold issue, HIIT training would be a benefit, or people with that mold issue are going to really struggle with that HIIT style training?
Generally speaking, I'd expect that they'd struggle with it, because, again, they're going to have poisons blocking the mitochondrial complexes. So complex 2 is definitely blocked by aflatoxins. So if you're not making energy through that cycle, you're going to try and push it, but you're going to get fatigued fairly quickly.
Yeah, that quick burnout and no... interesting. So in terms of, like, for your average punter who's not seeing a functional medicine doc to get all their health queries walked out, what would be the things that you would sort of symptomatically suggest maybe a mold sensitivity or a mold mitochondrial issue?
Again, unexplained brain fog for one, changes in your fingernail shape, colour, thickness, starting to hunt.
What sort of colour would you be expecting?
They tend to go kind of yellowy and milky. You lose the moons potentially as well. They can thicken up. They can break more unexpectedly. They just don't perform wonderfully well. So just keep looking at that. Toenails especially, tinea is one that people will have heard of. Athlete's foot.
That's right, because if you've got systemic fungal, you expect to get it everywhere else as well.
Absolutely. So, as I say, brain fog, bloating in the gut, hunting for sugar, afternoon tiredness around 2 p.m, an hour or so after having eaten, because you're just not digesting things well and the sugar is spiked and dropped. So a lot of those diabetic type symptoms could also have a mold possibility. We tend to look at adrenal fatigue as part and parcel of that. They have similar symptoms, and you have to kind of differentiate and rule between the two. Skin change.
What would be like your top 2 or 3 supplements or lifestyle changey tips you would give out to someone who was trying to prevent leaky gut and brain inflammation from a mold problem specifically?
Okay, so there's a bunch of different things that I would utilize. The first and foremost is we would be getting rid of processed carbohydrates. If you keep feeding them lots of sugars, you're going to have trouble. There's just no two ways about it. So there are anti-candida diets out there which basically take away all your yeasts in food, like brewer's yeast, baker's yeast. You take away your alcohols, you take away your fruit, you take away your carbohydrates like breads, etc. And as I said, this goes on for like 3 to 6 months. It's a long, long time. There are antifungal type herbs, or you might use antifungal medications depending on whether we're seeing skin. So there are topical ones that you can put on to treat the tinea at the same time, or toenails. And that's not a bad thing. While I'm not the biggest fan of pharmaceuticals, so to speak, because they generally have more side effects, everything's a tool. It may be that that's the right tool to solve the issue because you're just not getting it with a herb at that moment in time. So,
and what sort of herbs, or is there a specific mix that you'd be looking at?
Oil of oregano is particularly good for it. We use things that have berberines and golden seals. And I tend to use, like, one of the ones that I use commonly is something called Intesticlear. It's made here in Australia, and it's got a great combination of herbs in it, including wild oil of oregano, to actually kind of not just hit one thing, but to try and actually alter how the gut quorums are actually operating and regulate a bit more effectively. From the leaky gut perspective, I use a whole lot of glutamine. There's this product called Optiversal that's got both glycine and glutamine mixed in, and I use reasonably high doses.
Let's give that a proper promo. Optimal Life Chiropractic, Scotty's own brand, has done wonders with that one.
I was trying not to be very big noting on it, but I designed it because, like, in these situations, you need both generally at the same time, and that particular product helps with glycination, which is a detoxification pathway. It helps with the glutathione production pathway. It helps with the glutamine to actually glue those tight junctions together and start making the epithelial lining stand up and actually start to heal. The glycine in itself acts as a neuromuscular inhibitor in the nervous system. It can help reduce production of autoimmune antibodies. So glycine's particularly good for that sort of thing. So we can actually start regulating a whole lot of the problems that are coming from immune dysregulation, either from mold or bacteria or autoimmune, with that particular product. It's slightly sweet. It's got no real flavor. Otherwise, white powder dissolves. Not really a great one to take overseas in your bag, especially your backpack, because
yeah, funky one.
Yeah.
I've worried about, because when I'm taking that with me, like, oh, geez, I put it in like a little.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, good.
yeah, and I was like, Jesus, do I need to smuggle this up my butt through?
Yeah, perhaps don't.
It might be a novel absorption mechanism. You never know.
Yeah, I'm just not sure Banged Up Abroad needs another member.
Either way, it is a concern.
Yeah.
But most of the time the dogs don't sniff it, so it's all right.
Now, there's another great product that I've been getting in from the States called Restore. And again, Restore is a lignite formulation, which is a whole bunch of really natural old minerals and amino acids that is categorically shown in research to decrease by around 70% the damage done to the tight junctions in the gut by things like gliadin and glyphosates. So it's really super protective against the damage that occurs in these situations. So this is something I take personally morning and night. And while I can't sit here and say, this is specific for stopping mold attacking your gut lining, it's going to upregulate the tensile strengths, etc., of those tight junctions for any insult coming at them. So it's one of my favorites. Again, basically flavorless, goes in anything, and I actually put it together in the morning with my Opti Up and the Optiversal, so that I've got a really simple drink, shoot it down, and at night I take the Optiversal and down with the lignite formulation called Restore.
Mate, we're coming up on almost 55 minutes. This has been an awesome chat. Next time, I really want to talk to you more about the that brain up, brain down.
Cool.
Stuff, because that's I know it's I haven't taken it personally, but it has helped a lot of my insomnia-based cases.
That's awesome to hear.
Mate, I'd love to. Any final thoughts before we?
Well, on that one, I was pleased to say another neuro practitioner down in Sydney has just started the Opti Up on some of her clients and found some really nice successes. Last thoughts about mold. Look for it in the environment. If it's in a bathroom and you find black, you need to avoid that bathroom. You need to get it treated. Bleach will not kill it. Bleach is just like peroxiding your hair. It makes it blonde. It makes it go white. So bleach is really not a very strong chlorine product. In of itself, we don't want it too strong because, people are stupid enough to eat Tide Pods, so they might actually drink the thing. So it's not strong in the environment. So you pour it on it. You're not actually really killing it. You might dent a few of the spores, but it's just looking nicer in your environment. So it's still there to attack you. And if you breathe those things in and you get them in you, you're in a world of hurt. Now, again, remember, anyone is sensitive to mold. Everyone. Some people are just more sensitive. Some people have a greater immune response to it. Everyone gets tired out by it because it releases toxins and it wants to live on the foods that you quite like eating.
On the last note, mate, I just saw that you're a speaker at this year's Australasian Environmental Medicine. What's the full title of that group?
ACNEM, the Australasian Academy of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, or Australasian College. It's a medical college. I've been pleasantly invited to talk.
Cairo represent.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of interesting. We're talking about pain, and realistically, I thought we were talking about brain inflammation, and so I wrote my presentation on neuroinflammation using a comorbid diabetic patient, and I sent it in to the president to have a brief look over, and it came back and said, well, yes, but how does that relate to pain? How does that relate to pain? And it was kind of interesting for me because how how the medics actually view these things is quite differently to how I view how things relate to pain. It's a real different model. Everything's very much point and click at that thing, rather than the approach I wrote is that everything in it kind of got tied together in the case. You've got to look at the protein, you've got to look at the iron levels, and you've got to look at the sugar, and some of it was quite basic, and I get that, and I was just trying to draw a picture, but it's very much a pain-based, even though it's neuroinflammation, we're talking pain, and so I've written it very much to talk about pain and how much, like from our point of view, if you start getting destruction of your cerebellum and your Purkinje fibers, etc., in there, you're going to have an upregulation of pain pathways going through to the frontal lobes, just because you're losing function. So say you break a leg and you get restriction of that leg, and it's a bad one, and maybe we've got 6 months not walking properly, or you damage your meniscus and you no longer move that leg in the same way because you've been compensating for it for a long time. That is going to have a significant effect on the amount of Purkinje cells due to TND, as we've spoken about, that will actually upregulate the production of kind of central sensitization and neuropathic pain pathways, regardless of the fact that the injury is actually healed. So you are...
That's awesome. That's a huge... mate, yeah, I'd love to... Let's make that another one of those things that we need to talk about. I'll add it to the list.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
See you next time.
Thank you for watching. To learn more from Dr. Scott, visit our site at optihuman.com.au.